In the wild, it pays to be sharp, alert, awake, aware. You may wish to snooze in the hot afternoon sun, but you have to keep an eye open for danger, an ear on who's lurking. And of course, you've got to be ready to scarper. Hold tight tonight. It's Springwatch. Hello, and welcome to Springwatch 2023, week 2, coming to you live from the beautiful RSPB Arn Reserve down here on the Isle of Purbeck in Dorset. Now, we got off to a very strong start last week, but our mission is the same this week, to bring you the very best of British wildlife from all around the UK. But this is a perfect place for a base because it's got an enormous range of habitats here. Poole Harbour, the salt marshes, the mud flats, it's got sandy lowland heath, it's got ancient woodland. It's therefore got a tremendous richness of life, a great deal of biodiversity, as we call it.
Great variety of habitats and a fantastic variety of hidden nests that we've got our live cameras on. Lots has been going on over the weekend. I'll tell you what, Chris, forget Britain's Got Talent, BGD. We have got SGD, Spring's Got Drama. And here are some of our headline acts. We've got foxes, fox families with hungry mouths to feed, a patient brooding nocturnal nightjar, a fabulous goldcrest. Did any chicks survive? Ferocious goshawk. What's on the menu for their chicks? The Dartford warblers, did they fledge? And we end our cast lineup with these adorable kestrel chicks. Just look at them. Absolutely gorgeous.
Stunning, stunning place. I do love it here at Arn. It's tremendous, but I am a little bit envious because I'm a man who likes a good castle. And there is a very good castle here. Corfe Castle, iconic piece of historical architecture in Dorset. It's just over there. You can see it below the horizon. Stunning, absolutely stunning. And that's where Megan McCubbin is.
Yes, I am here in Corfe Castle. You're a bit too far away for me to wave to you this time, but I am just over here and I'm hoping, I've got everything crossed, to bring you a live footage of some royalty that lives in the tallest part of the tallest tower.
Royalty in Corfe Castle. We'll look forward to that. Looks absolutely glorious there. But it's not just about Dorset. We're also coming live from North Wales, where Gillian is.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned biodiversity in Arn. We've got biodiversity and a little bit of noise, a siren going off there. Because if you look behind me, you can see Wales. That is the Welsh mainland, and spanning is the Britannia Bridge across to the island of Anglesey. And I know the tide is out at the moment, but later in the programme, we're going to be looking at the fierce tidal currents that run here that create treacherous rapids, but also bring life to this amazing strait. Now, Chris and Michaela, I promise I'm not going to be getting out in the water. It gets pretty scary here, but there will be some science and a few surprises.
I don't know though, the sun's shining there. I think she should get in the water, shouldn't she? The sun's been shining all weekend, actually. And as I said at the beginning, it's been a very busy weekend for our live nests with lots of drama going on. Let's have a look at them now, because we've still got a fabulous selection despite the fact that we've lost some nests, but we've gained others. And there's a brand new nest as well, which I'm really excited about. And I'm not going to tell you exactly what it is right now. I'm going to reveal it later, but I'm going to give you a clue. Just have a look. This is a ground nesting nest. And inside there is, you could just see some of the feathers sticking out. So if you know what that could be, then make a guess. Let us know on social media using @BBC Springwatch, and we'll let you know if you're right or wrong.
Quite tricky that. I'll tell you what, let's go live to our oyster catcher's nest. Striking black and white birds, not uncommon, find them all around the UK coast, of course, and at this time of year, they're nesting on shingle beaches. This is quite an unusual nest, as you might have seen last week. It didn't have a single clutch of eggs in, it actually had 2 clutches of eggs in. And if we take a closer look at those eggs now, you can see that they're discernibly different. So the patterning and shape of 3 of them are similar and the other 3 are slightly different. So what we think was happening here was that this was a case perhaps of egg dumping. So you've got a female with a nest with eggs in it, her own eggs, and then another female will come in and deposit hers in the same nest. Perhaps she's lost her nest or there isn't available habitat. Or it could be polygyny, a male with more than one female, and then one of those females decides to lay it in the other one's nest. We're not entirely sure about that, but we were keen to see what was going to happen. Well, there's been a bit of a spoiler in the live shot there because, as you've seen, they've been hatching. So this is what was happening over the weekend. Here on Saturday, look at that egg in the foreground. You can see a small hole has appeared. It's pipping, as we say. So the first of the 6 eggs was certainly about to hatch. No more activity on Saturday, but on Sunday morning, first thing, you can see that that youngster has made its way out of the egg, and within a few hours, it had dried off and was ready to get up on its feet. These are what we call precocial chicks, precocious. They're ready to go. They're ready to dash across the shingle, to scarper from predators, or to even start looking for their own food. And this one seemed to be finding its feet, but it was doing quite well. May look very obvious to us, but I can tell you that that brown on their backs is perfect camouflage if you're looking down onto the shingle. A bit later on, the second egg hatched, and you can see that one dried off quite quickly too. Adults have been quite diligent, out and about, finding food and bringing it back. Here's a marine worm, and you can see that already that chick is ready to run across the shingle and grab the prey. They hatch with an innate curiosity. They'll start pecking at things to find out if they're edible. And here it pecks at a piece of crab, and sure enough, that is edible. So that's 2 of the eggs that had hatched. What about the other 4 that were in the nest? We know that the adults, when they've been incubating, have been having trouble covering all of those eggs, and sometimes some of the eggs have been left outside the bird in the cold. So were they going to hatch? Well, look at this. Yesterday there was a bit more activity. So last night, late. Look, there you are. Look in the foreground. You can see the fluffy chick on the left, and there in the foreground is another wet chick, indicating that it's just hatched out. This was the 3rd chick. But, as I mentioned, they've been having trouble covering all of the eggs to incubate them. They were now going to have trouble covering all of the chicks to brood them. And unfortunately, the little one, the recently hatched one, didn't have the strength to crawl back under the wing like its sibling there, and it was left outside in the cold overnight. First thing this morning, we were wondering what had happened to that youngster. The original 2 hatchees were out and about, but here it is. It has dried off, it's up on its feet, it's looking relatively strong, already dashing across the shingle. But unfortunately, as the day went on, it seemed to become weaker and weaker. Now, whether it was not being fed, we're not sure, but by this afternoon, it was certainly unsteady on its feet, and I'm afraid that by about 2:30, it had fallen over and expired. Now, I reckon there was probably something congenitally wrong with this bird. It did get up and it did have some strength there. There's no doubt about that. It wasn't the overnight chilling that led to its demise, I don't think. And it certainly seemed to have been being fed. But why it died, we don't know. But the good news is, of course, that those 2 chicks are still there and both of the adults are still incubating the remaining 3 eggs. So we're going to keep our eyes peeled on that nest to see what happens.
So lovely to watch those little 2 chicks. And as you say, fingers crossed that they're still with us tomorrow, because already, if you were watching last week, you'll know that we've had some predation and some of our nests have gone. In particular, we were watching the Goldcrest nest and it became Goldcrest versus Jay. We don't know how many chicks were in that nest. Could have been 6 or 7. On Thursday, we saw 1 chick predated by the Jay. On Friday, the Jay came back and took 4. And then later on Friday at 4:27, this happened. The Jay was back. Didn't even know whether there were any chicks left in that nest, but clearly there was, because the Jay got another one. So we thought that was it, empty nest. But it appeared not, because the adults were coming back and clearly feeding 1 remaining chick. So who won, the Jay or the chick? Well, I'm afraid 3 days later, which was today at 11:13, The jay was back and it took the remaining chicks. So that's all the chicks gone from that particular nest. So that nest, I'm afraid to say, was unsuccessful.
Well, that pair of gold crests were unsuccessful, but as we said earlier, they lay very large clutches of eggs and have the capacity to rear large broods of birds. They may have another go this year, or just round the corner there could be another gold crest flying the flag for that species by successfully rearing a brood of maybe 8 to 10 youngsters. OK, let's go live to our Dartford's nest now. Here it is, I'm afraid to say, it's empty. But I'm jesting. It's been a successful fledging, no predation here. Let's see what was going on over the weekend. We did say we thought they might go over the weekend. Firstly, back to Thursday. They're sparsely feathered here. They're certainly not looking fluffy, but they grow incredibly quickly. They will fledge, or at least semi-fledge, between 10 and 14 days. And here, look, as you can see, by Saturday, they're certainly a lot fluffier. You can still see their prominent gape flanges there, indicating they're chicks, but they were active on their feet and they'd started to hop in and out of the nest throughout the course of Saturday. I have to say they were all back in the nest overnight Saturday night. That probably made sense. They weren't quite ready to go. But then at 7 o'clock on Sunday morning, they made a bit of a squawk and headed off into the surrounding vegetation. And of course, this is a perfect strategy for these birds. They're not truly fledging because they're not flight-worthy at this stage, but they're dispersing into that foliage. Having all of your chicks in one basket is not a good idea when there are plenty of predators about. So spreading them out in that foliage is a good idea. They can individually hide. And of course, when the adults come back with food, they'll make a little contact call and the adults will find them and feed them. And it will be maybe at least another week before they can flutter weakly across the top of the heather to fly away from danger themselves.
That is our first fledging of the season. So that is a positive, hopeful story. And I think we should keep on that theme with our osprey. Let's have a look at our osprey nest live, because this is a pair of ospreys, CJ7 and 022. This is the second successful breeding that they've had, the breeding season. First time that any osprey have bred on this coastline for 200 years. So this really is a story full of hope, full of positivity. You can see under there just one chick. And by the end of last week, we had 2 chicks that had hatched and 1 egg. Our prediction, Chris,
yeah, we got it wrong,
was that it wouldn't hatch. Pleased to say we were wrong, because this is what happened Thursday after the show, 11:35. That remaining egg started to have a little crack in it. Clearly it had begun to hatch. It continued to do so throughout the night, and then in the morning, Friday morning, first thing, the adult gets up and you can just see the little head of the 3rd chick and just peeking out underneath its 2 siblings. As the day continued, the adults came in, brooded them and fed them, and look, we saw this last week when it was just 2 chicks. It's so delicate. What I find quite funny though, the male tries, the female says, give it here, I can do it much quicker, which is a story that you've heard often in life, generally. And
what?
Anyway, they continue to feed those 3 chicks.
My mum wasn't so quick to fix the Vauxhall Viva when the brakes went, I can tell you.
Look at those chicks. So what's interesting is that the brand new chick doesn't look like it's much smaller than the 2 that hatched a couple of days ago.
I know, it's doing really well. 3 osprey chicks in the south of England.
Good news, hopeful, positive. Remember, keep hold of that thought.
Absolutely sensational. Anyway, let's head back to Corfe now. There are some fine tea rooms in Corfe where you can get yourself some scones or scones. Megs, have you had any scones or scones?
Chris, I don't know what you're on about. I haven't had a chance to have a scone or a scone at this point in time because, quite frankly, I've got lots of things to do and I've got some more important birds to be seeing. But as you mentioned, I am at the National Trust's Corfe Castle. It's a really important historic area. It was founded by William the Conqueror just after the Norman Conquest in 1066, and then sadly it fell to ruins a few hundred years later in about the 1640s during the English Civil War. Now, it used to be home to kings, queens, princesses and knights, things of fairy tales. But today, in the modern world, it's home to some raptor royal species. We've got a pair of peregrine falcons nesting in the nesting in the castle, which is so very exciting. And we've got one of our wildlife long lens cameramen out and about, James Stevens, hoping to see them live. Let's have a little look at the nest, which is situated just up here. Let's see, can we see, is there any action in there now? No, not much at the minute, but I can say that there is a peregrine sat in there. We think it's the female, and she has been active a little bit. But over the course of the last week, we have been keeping an eye on them to see what their activities have been like. And here is one of the adults flying around brilliantly. Now, these peregrines moved into the castle in 2020 during lockdown, but it's not the first time peregrines have nested here on Corfe. They were first recorded here, breeding, about 40 years ago, and they're doing quite well across the whole Purbeck area. But isn't it beautiful to see? It gives us that real chance to get that connection with these raptors, because they often are seen nesting in our cathedrals, our ruined castles. But here they're actually nesting in a raven's nest, a pair that they ousted when they first arrived. And look at that, here is some footage that we saw earlier on of the female. And we think she's probably on eggs at the minute. We haven't seen the male coming in and out with food provisioning, so we think there's some eggs in there. They're yet to be hatched, but actually we don't know how many there are. There could be a number of eggs in there, but it's really hard to see because the raven's nest is so deep and they are tucked on in. Beautiful to see. But sadly, I haven't yet seen them flying around, but that doesn't matter because that actually is an exciting thing, but there is something that I get equally as intrigued by, and that's looking for the crumbs that they leave behind. So recently I've been scouting about below their nest to try and find what they've been leaving, and look, I've got a jar of treasures here. And if I take a look inside, we've got some pigeon bones at the bottom and a pellet, but I want to draw your attention to a couple of the feathers. So this one here is the feather of a juvenile starling, we think. Look how gorgeous that is. Now that's a rather nice one, but it can be trumped by taking a look at this. Now have a look and see what you think this is. Now you've got that green marking and that barring across the feather there. This is the feather of a green woodpecker. They've been out taking green woodpeckers, which is pretty cool to see, and it gives us an opportunity to see what their diet is like, to see what their food is like. And it very much depends on the habitat in which that they're living. So essentially, it very much depends. If they're living by the ocean, then they'll be feeding on gulls and godwits a little bit more. But if they're on heathland, like the ones here, they might be feeding on Dartford warblers. And actually, just last week, we found a wing of a Dartford warbler here, so they have been feeding on that. But they're very much a generalist species. In the UK, they can feed on about 100 of our bird species, but across the world, they'll feed on many more. Here we are. A peregrine falcon getting its eye in, and as I said earlier, they are they have a very varied diet, but around the world they are most widely distributed. They live on every continent except Antarctica, and they will feed on so many different types of prey. Over 2,000, we think. It's, some people say about 2,000 species of prey that they'll feed on, but that would mean that they would feed on over 1/5 of the current known bird species around the world, which is something that is pretty cool. Now, if they live on the coast, as I said earlier, they'll feed a lot of coastal birds, and we got sent this amazing photograph in. Check this out. This is a peregrine falcon catching a puffin. And at that moment, that puffin is still alive. It's a bad day for the puffin. A brilliant photo by Dan Howell there. Quite shocking in many ways. But as a bird which is the fastest in the world, feeding on prey which is not equally as fast, but very fast itself, you have to have some really strong adaptations. So their vision is very detailed and very sharp, but it's also about their markings and their plumage too. Now, recent studies from last year show that actually, depending on where the peregrines are in the world, will depend on their plumage. So up here, we've got a peregrine falcon living in less sunny environment, and the marking here is quite thin. But as you go into increased solar radiation, what you can see is that the marking on the eye of the peregrine actually increases, the width expands, and it essentially acts almost like a natural sunglass, if you want. It means that the flare and the glare from the sun won't get into their eyes, making sure that they are as effective as possible when they're out and about hunting for those fast-moving birds at super, super top speeds. Now, from one amazing bird at the top of Corfe Castle to North Wales, where Gillian is. Gillian, what have you got planned for us today?
Well, we have fierce rapids and tidal currents. But first, let me establish where we are in North Wales. So this is week 2 of our tour of North Wales. Last week we were up in the mountains of Eryri, what you might know as Snowdonia, and we headed north for this week, and we've headed to that tiny narrow strait called the Menai Strait. Now, if you look behind me, you can see a stretch of it. It's a very long, narrow stretch. It runs about 25 kilometers, way beyond what you can see here. But what's really interesting is that locally, the Menai Strait is known as Avon Menai, which means the river Menai. Now, you can see at low tide, it's hard to read, but at high tide, when you see here, what you can see is why people would have called it, and still do in some ways, a river, because it very much looks like one. But I assure you, this is very much a marine environment. It's fed by tidal currents that enter the channel on 2 sides, on the northeast and the southwest. So an absolutely amazing spot. Now, if you look across to the island of Anglesey, that island will actually shelter the strait from the open ocean that's on the other side, so it shelters it from all the wave action. So a really sheltered but still dynamic environment because of those tides. And of course, the tides are the one dependable, predictable feature here. So a few days ago, I headed out at low tide with marine ecologist Paul Brazier for a spot of rock pooling on the strait. So, let's find a good spot.
The further down you go, the better it gets, basically.
Yeah. What makes the Menai Strait such a special marine habitat?
It's really down to the flow of water, I reckon. The strait is incredibly tidal, and so there's loads of water rushing through here. It connects the water body with from outside of the strait, so bringing in juveniles and bringing in settling animals and plants. But it also brings the nutrients through.
So a little bit like a conveyor belt of food going past.
Yeah. And so within the whole of the Menai Strait, you've got an incredible variety of habitats. Every habitat has got its different collection of animals and plants, so along the whole stretch it's very diverse.
It's a case of, I guess, getting stuck in, right?
Absolutely. There's a few loose boulders here, which is good. Got a little edible crab.
Edible crab?
Beautiful.
So in Cornwall, we always think that that crimping looks like a pasty.
Yeah.
Do you say the same thing up here?
Yeah, the pie crust. Well, yeah, pie crust. In Cornwall, it's a pasty. In
Wales, it's a pie crust.
A lovely little cushion star. There's quite a few of those around here, but you don't find them everywhere, so they're a bit of a novelty, really, when you do find them.
And everyone loves a cushion star, obviously.
Absolutely, yes, yeah. We've got some dog whelk eggs here. And actually some baby dog whelks.
Right next to them. And it wasn't long before Paul found what I really came here to see.
Oh, look. Look what we've got here.
Oh, wow. So that is a sea slope. It's beautiful. It's got quite sort of elaborate, almost like tentacles, fronds all along the body. Now, what are those called? The structures.
They're amazing, actually. They are amazing. They've got rhinophores, which are the tentacles at the front, and then they've what they're called carata, all these apparently tentacles on the back. And those are actually full of stinging cells which they've collected from eating sea fur. So they eat the sea fur, and rather than digesting everything, they manage to move the stinging cells to the back of their bodies as a protection. So they're wearing a sort of a coat of stinging cells.
Which they've recruited from another species.
Yeah.
That is
brilliant.
Cool.
Absolutely brilliant they are.
Well, what I also think is cool is that you're not sure what species this is, and you've been rock pooling here for 20 years. So this is quite special.
This is where the microscope comes out again, just to look at those finer details.
So that's going to have a closer inspection at some point?
Yeah.
Brilliant. I can't wait to find out what that is. Well, that was definitely an ID challenge for Paul, but he thinks that what we found there was a Phaseolina bostoniensis. Now, looking at it again, this is actually quite an interesting species. It doesn't have a common name. It was first described in 1838 in Massachusetts Bay, all the way on the other side of the Atlantic, but now confirmed around 2020 with some DNA sequencing work that it is indeed the same species, and it's known as an amphi-Atlantic species. So that means it's the same species found on either side of the Atlantic. So absolutely brilliant to see an unusual species here. Now, we love birds on the watches. Of course, that's not a surprise. Everything from robins to raptors. So it is especially devastating when we find out that some have been illegally killed, and this is a threat to many of our birds of prey especially. So Frank Gardner, BBC correspondent and president of the BTO, headed out to Cumbria to meet someone who is fighting for justice for one of our most threatened bird species.
As a BBC journalist, it's my job to find the answers to sometimes quite controversial issues. And the plight of our British birds is one that is very close to my heart, has been for quite some time. Amazingly, I've still got one of my notebooks from when I was 11 years old, where I took these really detailed notes and maps, drew little pictures and stuff like that. I was really into it. I cared about where they lived, how they lived, and how long they lived. And as I've got older, that passion hasn't gone away. As often as I can, I'm out photographing them, and some of my favourites to capture, on film that is, are our birds of prey. They are just so charismatic. But over the years, they have faced a number of threats. Habitat loss is one factor, but the greatest threat is from persecution by human hand. In the UK, all birds of prey are protected by law, and killing them is illegal. But sadly, it's still happening all over the country. One of our most persecuted birds of prey is found here in Cumbria, the hen harrier. Sometimes called the sky dancer because of its amazing aerobatic display in spring. It's a critically endangered bird in the UK. Nesting pairs are so vulnerable that they're being watched over 24/7 by people like Howard Jones. He's a field officer for the RSPB's investigations team.
At this point in time, the birds would be courting each other, so there'd be a lot of interaction. A male will try and show that they are a really proficient hunter to a female by providing lots of food and being a good partner, and that's one of their key roles in the nesting process.
Oh, that's bird down.
Yes,
Yeah.
there he is gliding.
Amazing.
Oh, look at that. Beautiful. Hardly has to flap his wings, he then just
They're
glides.
just such graceful flyers.
Very graceful. He's going up and up. That is thrilling to see that. This male is a juvenile, and he hasn't yet got his adult plumage. His markings are very similar to the female at this stage. So that kind of chuckling noise that we can sometimes hear, that's red grouse, isn't it?
Yeah, so there's lots of red grouse on this nature reserve.
Red grouse are wild birds and native to the UK. However, grouse moors manage their land to maximise numbers. They're regarded by many as the pinnacle of game birds because their speed and agility provide challenging shooting on driven grouse moors.
Driven grouse shooting is where they drive the grouse into the guns.
So the beaters would drive the grouse
Yes.
towards, whereas a
Yeah.
line of people with shotguns.
Yes, yeah.
Right. Hen harriers hunt small mammals and birds, including grouse chicks, and when they fly nearby, they can also cause the grouse to scatter, which can disrupt a shoot. According to the RSPB's most recent bird crime report, in 2021, there were 108 confirmed raptor persecution incidents, and they say the majority of those, 71%, occurred in connection with land managed for game bird shooting. This is disputed by organisations who campaign for hunting and shooting in the UK, such as the Countryside Alliance. They told us, despite the RSPB's relentless efforts to the contrary, there is no evidence to support the claim that 71% of those incidents of raptor persecution were related to those with shooting interests. The data used by the RSPB is chosen to suit its politically driven campaign against shooting. Looking at the huge distance he's already covered, it gives you some idea, doesn't it, of just the range of his territory. And I suppose the danger to him, if he strays out of this reserve, that someone's going to take a shot at him.
Yeah, and where we are at the moment, we're surrounded by grouse moors, and if there's people nearby who might have the motive to kill the male hen harrier, that is a really effective way of making the nest fail, because then the female has no partner to provide food, will then abandon her nest, and the nest is likely to fail.
The RSPB are not the only ones to suggest that more hen harriers die on or near grouse moors than anywhere else. A Natural England study from 2019 found that when 58 hen harriers were fitted with tags, 72% were illegally killed or disappeared suddenly with no evidence of a tag malfunction, and that the likelihood of hen harriers dying or disappearing is 10 times higher within areas predominantly covered by grouse moor compared to areas with no grouse moor. The report concluded that there was overwhelming evidence that illegal killing is occurring on some grouse moors, where some gamekeepers view hen harriers as a threat to their grouse stocks. In response to this, the Countryside Alliance said, of the 58 satellite-tagged hen harriers used in the 10-year period of the study, just 4 were confirmed as being illegally killed, whilst the paper strongly suggests that the disappearance of a further 38 hen harriers, whose satellite tags stopped transmitting with no indication of a malfunction, was likewise due to illegal killing on British grouse moors. There was no firm evidence to prove that was the case. They went on to say that there is no excuse for the illegal killing of any bird of prey, and the Countryside Alliance unreservedly condemns all such acts. According to the RSPB, 18 hen harriers have gone missing from across the UK in the past year alone. So you've established that they're going missing, but how do you know that they're actively being killed rather than just dying off?
These males, once they've got a nest, they are programmed to provide and give the female every chance. So they shouldn't just go missing. It's not natural, that. And obviously we strongly suspect that it's a legal crime that's doing that.
Whatever the reasons for hen harriers going missing, while birds continue to do so, Howard will be out on the hillside keeping watch.
I love birds of prey, and hen harriers in particular are one of the most special species that I think anyone can ever experience. So the fact that there are people out there who think it's okay to legally kill them, it's just mind-boggling to me that we're still in 2023 and people are doing this, and it makes me mad. So yeah, you want to catch the people killing these birds and to try and get some sort of justice for them.
It is indeed mind-boggling. And Frank made that film earlier this spring, and at that time there were 5 nesting pairs of hen harriers on that site. Very sadly, since then, 2 of the males have completely disappeared. One of those males was paired up with a female who had a satellite collar on her. And data has shown that when that male disappeared, the female then had a panic response, abandoned her nest with 3 eggs in it, and flew 50 miles away. So as Frank was saying, if there's no male to support the female, it means that it's an unsuccessful nest. And those 3 eggs could have been potentially 3 hen harriers in the future, but no chance now. He will continue his investigation into raptor persecution because, very sadly, it's not just hen harriers that are targeted, and we will see the second part of that on tomorrow's programme.
OK, at the top of the programme, you said everyone an ID quiz.
I did
Identify
indeed.
the bird on the ground. It was quite
indeed.
tricky. Did anyone get it?
A few people got it very wrong, and I've lost the piece of paper now where I wrote it down. Oh, here we go. Dartford warbler.
No.
People thought it was Dartford warbler. Skylark, stonechat, grey wagtail. This, you'll love this one. Capercaillie. Someone thought it was.
I mean, it'd be great if they were down here.
But nobody got it right.
Let's go live to that nest now to see if we can see what it is. There it is. You can see it a little more clearly. You've got some feather detail there now. It's actually very well camouflaged on the ground. It's filling the whole whole nest, and it's just one bird. And there's another clue for you. I can tell you it is, in fact, a young cuckoo and it's squatting in a meadow pipit's nest. And of course, we've been watching this bird throughout the course of the day, and here you can see it more clearly. The adult meadow pipits, both of them, have been feeding it as regularly as it demands, and it's a very demanding chick. And there you can see its enormous orange gape. The adult's coming in. We think it's about 12 to 14 days old. And of course, the adult cuckoo, a brood parasite, would have laid its eggs in the nest, and this is the surviving youngster. And believe it or not, even though it's got that massive orange mouth, it's deficient in visual stimuli, in the sense that obviously if there were a nest full of meadow pipit youngsters, that would be a bigger area of mouths to stimulate those adult pipits. So it does try and have the biggest mouth possible. And there you can see on the left-hand side of the screen is one of the eggs which it turfed out. Now, when a cuckoo lays an egg in a nest like this, it removes one of the eggs and then replaces it with its own. The trick is that its egg will hatch more quickly than the meadow pipits, and as soon as it does, the youngster displaces those eggs, so it's got no competition. But it's the first time that we've had a cuckoo live on Springwatch. We've had them pre-recorded, but now we can watch it round the clock. We're hoping to learn a lot more about its behaviour in the coming days, so stay tuned for that.
There is so much to say about it, isn't it? Because it really is a bonkers nest, and that cuckoo is just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And if I show you this photo that's been sent in by Mrs. Geordie Picks, is what she says her name is, look at that. I mean, that is a cuckoo that's still being fed. So it's fledged, but still being fed by the adult, and it's what? 8 times bigger or something mad. So yes, it's going to be really interesting to see how much that cuckoo grows over the next 2 weeks.
Fantastic stuff, lots to squeeze in tonight, so let's go immediately back to Corfe Castle over there, where Megs has been having a smashing time tonight.
I'm going to not react to that whatsoever. It has all been cleared up, don't you worry about that. Now, I love, whenever I go to places like this, really getting my eye into the cracks and crevices of the habitat, because you truly never know what you're going to find. Now, we've said across this super national nature reserve that there are 6 native species of reptile, but tonight I'm going to introduce you to a 7th that accidentally found its way here. We sent off our wildlife camera operators to go and get a glimpse of this, and I am talking, of course, about wall lizards that found their way here to Corfe Castle, or first documented here, in 2006, although the population may be older. Their home, as the name suggests, is walls, boulders, rocks, where they live in and around, basking in the sun. And as reptiles, of course, they are entirely dependent on the sun's heat to regulate their own body temperature, as well for their own reproduction purposes. They are a non-native species. Look at it there, getting its nose in for an invertebrate that's tucked itself away in the crevice of one of those walls. But a DNA study found that the population here at Corfe Castle most likely originated from around Venice, which is rather interesting. It's amazing how they made their way here. They found their way here in the Victorian era, when they were kept as pets and sadly then released, and now there are small populations, pockets, across the UK. But of course it does beg the question, the population here in the UK is very different from where they originate in Europe and in Venice. So how do they tolerate these kind of colder, milder climates? Well, we got sent in this photo by one of the fantastic volunteers at the Purbeck Heath National Nature Reserve, Terry Bagley, and this is a wall lizard basking in the sun. Now, it's really hard to sex wall lizards. You have to know about the top of their head, but we think this is a female because of the bulge in her stomach, where there are, hopefully, a few eggs ready to be laid in the soft sand and soil, where they will then be incubated by that soil and then will hatch as young wall lizards. But of course, in those milder climates, then actually there's less embryonic development if it's too cold, and then less reproductive success. But wall lizards have come up with an ingenious way of mitigating against that. And have a look over here. So here I have an egg of a wall lizard from Europe and one from the UK. Now let's take a look at Europe first. If I remove my eggshell, you'll see an embryo there, which is, slightly developed, but not overly so. And if I come to the UK, my embryo is much more developed there. And there's 2 reasons for that. Firstly, it's something called egg retention. So the females won't lay as quickly as the ones in Europe. They will keep those eggs in their bellies for as long as possible to make the most of that thermoregulation that the female can provide. And the second is that once those eggs have laid, the developmental process happens a lot faster. So overall, actually, wall lizards are able to reduce incubation time in the sand and the soil, depending on where they've laid their eggs, by about 1 to 2 weeks, mitigating against that colder climate and really kind of helping the population here within the UK. It's amazing to see how these animals are able to develop in such a short period of time since the Victorian era. I mean, it really is evolution in action, and it's brilliant to see. But now it's time to take a moment and go away from the wall lizards, which have an amazing adaptation to deal with a colder climate, to an incredible alien-like animal that lives under the waves that has loads of funky adaptations to reproduce.
The spring sunshine glistens as waves crash onto our coastlines. And while nothing appears out of the ordinary above the surface, beneath the waves, spring triggers a little-known marine creature to make its way into the shallows. The sea hare. These amazing creatures are a type of snail. But rather than carrying enormous shells on their backs, they have a secret internal shell hidden inside their bodies, protecting their vital organs. It's their protruding tentacles, resembling the ears of a familiar mammal, that give them their name. But they serve an important purpose, as they use them to sense the world around them. Food is high on their agenda. Sea hares are zealous grazers and can consume up to 1/3 of their body weight every day. But they haven't travelled all this way just to eat. They're here to breed. At the optimum time, a sea hare releases a potent pheromone, signalling their readiness to others nearby. They're hermaphrodites, with both male and female sex organs. But they still need a partner, or partners, for fertilization. For sea hares, the best way to share the love is to form a chain. The hare at the front acts as a female, and the hare at the back, a male. All of the others in between fulfill both roles. In each link of the chain, the sea hare in front is inseminated by the sea hare behind. These mating chains can last for hours. Sea hares will lay fertilized eggs in long threads. Sealed inside every meter may be as many as 200,000 eggs. These are anchored to the seabed or seaweeds with a sticky jelly. And in less than 3 weeks' time, tiny larvae will hatch out and drift away into the plankton, while the adult sea hares return back into the depths of the ocean, making way for the next generation.
What amazing animals, absolutely amazing animals. But we are Menai Strait, welcome back. We are at a location called Church Island, and it sounds exactly as it is. It's a little church on a little island in the Menai Strait, and it looks very peaceful, but this church has borne witness to some of the fastest tidal currents in the whole country, as the Menai Strait empties and fills twice a day, every day since the church was built in the 15th century. Now, if you look behind me, the Menai Strait is at its narrowest, one of its narrowest points over here. And when the tide starts to run, it can run up to speeds of 8 knots. Now, just to compare with your typical coastal beach, which normally hits speeds of 2 knots, this will run 4 times faster. And it not only flushes the strait and keeps it clean and free from pollutants, but it also brings valuable nutrients to all the wildlife here. And what's absolutely amazing is that those incredible wildlife, the nutrients travel right across as far as the other side of the Atlantic. So really important ocean currents bringing those nutrients here. Now, the ocean currents, the Earth's circulatory system, if you like, bring these nutrients, but they also help to stabilize our climate. But the question is, what drives these currents, the circulatory system? Well, to show you, we've got a little experiment. I've even got the lab coat because we're going to get ready for some science on the beach. And what we have here is a demonstration, a little experiment, and I have to thank the team at Bangor University at the Ocean Sciences Department for helping us do this, because this tank represents the North Atlantic. Over this side is the North Pole, and on this side is the equator. So let's take a look at what happens at the equator first. Now, the sun is beating down over here, and in order to show you how this affects the water currents, I'm going to put a good amount of red food coloring into that little ladle there. And then, to represent the sun warming the surface waters there, I'm going to pour some hot water into that ladle. And what you should start to see is that dye pouring out. We're just going to trickle a little bit more water there. And what you should see is, as it settles, that red dye starts to stream across the surface of the water. That's because the hot water, the warm surface temperatures, rises and stays above the cooler water below. It's less dense. Now, what's interesting is it's starting to be pulled towards the North Pole. Why is that? Well, let's take a look what happens at the North Pole. Now, what we have is a whole bunch of icebergs that we're going to drop on this side, keep them on there, get a few more going, get that nice and cold. And this time, just move that back, I'm going to pour some blue food dye, a good amount of that, and you immediately see that starting to sink. That cold water is more dense and it sinks to the bottom of the surface. So out in the open ocean, this is sinking to depths of over 1,000 meters and heading south across the abyssal plain, amazing environments, over to the equator. And this starts to become like a conveyor belt, a circulatory system. And it's called the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Current. Quite a mouthful. But this is what's responsible for what we call the Gulf Stream. Now, the Gulf Stream will start at the equator, and as it leaves the American continental shelf, it becomes the North Atlantic Current. And it brings warm water to Ireland, to the British Isles, Western Europe, and keeps our climate a lot warmer than these northern latitudes would suggest. So far, so good. However, a changing climate could change all of this. And what we could start to see, in fact, what we are starting to see, according to the team here, is these warmer surface temperatures, the water reaching way further north than what we've been used to. And it's starting to create something called the Arctic Atlantification. So the Arctic Sea is starting to behave a bit more like the Atlantic Ocean. And in the very long term, this could stall this circulatory system. Now, this is a very long view, possibly in the next century. However, here and now, what we are starting to see with these warmer temperatures moving along are species, exotic tropical visitors, seasonal visitors to our water. So things like this triggerfish here, very much a tropical species. It's now seen almost annually, considered a seasonal visitor, and you can see it there moving through kelp forests. So quite an alien environment for this tropical species. Now, you could say this is quite exciting, getting exotic tropical species on our shores. However, tomorrow what we are going to see is how it's not all rosy for these tropical species when they get marooned here. So that's for now. For now, what we need to do is make sure that we don't get caught out by that tide. And Chris and Michaela, I'm going to let you take it over while we quickly scramble out of here and not get caught out by the incoming tide, which, as we all know, is pretty fierce.
Scramble out quick, Gillian. Great demo.
Hey, that demonstration was superb. Absolutely superb, yeah.
Let's bring us back to the here and now and to an update on a nest that it is of a very common bird, one you may well have in your own gardens, the blackbird. Started off with 4 chicks last week. Now, one died in the nest, didn't get predated, and shortly after that, a second one died in the nest. Causes of death unknown. But then we saw this. This is the nest. It's in that fallen down trunk, and both parents were coming in, feeding worms and other invertebrates. But then we saw this, a berry being fed to those chicks. Now, this is pretty unusual. And then we thought, well, maybe there just wasn't enough food. Very difficult to get worms if it's hard ground, and it has been really dry. We've had 55% of the expected rain in this region. So perhaps that was the cause of death. So 4 went down to 2, and then this happened. So they continue to brood, that's the female, on the 2, but the 2 dead chicks are still in that nest. She then decides to do a little bit of spring cleaning and takes one of the chicks out. But there's still one dead chick in there, and that's not a good strategy to leave it there, because the smell of a dying chick can attract predators like weasels, stoats, and foxes.
Certainly can, and if we look at this nest, you can see it's very open, unprotected, not a lot of foliage hiding where that nest is. And so it wasn't surprising, as Michaela said, that you've got all the noise coming from the chicks. It's not well hidden, and you've then got the smell of a dead chick in there. Look what happened. A fox did actually turn up. So the adults are coming back to the nest. She hears something. Something's definitely going on. She hops down. She doesn't feed the young, the worms that she so diligently collected. And she's looking out, and there, look, on the left-hand side of your screen, you can see the fox peering up at that nest. It can definitely see the blackbird, it can definitely smell the blackbird, and it's been listening to its young. She then decides not to feed them at all, but to brood them, to keep them quiet. She drops the worms. One of the worms falls over the side of the nest, down to the base of that tree, and the fox picks up the scent of the worm. And of course, it comes in and eats it. At this stage, the mother blackbird loses her nerve, and she bolts out of the nest. Now there's no doubt at all that the fox knows exactly where it is. It knows it can't climb up and reach that nest from that spot, so it goes round to the other side, climbs up on the trunk, and then begins to dig through the root bowl towards the nest. And you can hear it there. I mean, this is a fox shining, isn't it? This is... Here's Johnny. The earth begins to tumble into the nest. A hole appears. The fox has made it through. Here comes the snout. And of course, now it's filled up the nest with soil, but nevertheless, that snout is very efficient. It smells exactly where the chicks are and easily withdraws one of them. The adults are powerless to do anything about this, to be honest with you. They're not going to risk their own lives getting too close to the fox. The fox has another sniff, can't find the last remaining chick, which is now buried in that soil, and it leaves, having made a tasty snack out of one of those blackbird chicks. Now the blackbirds return, obviously, trying to salvage the situation, but unfortunately that chick is buried by the soil that was dislodged by the fox. So the female comes back in, and after a period of time concludes that there's no point in wasting those worms. She eats them herself. And this nest has come to an end.
Everyone was on the edge of their seats watching that. I mean, how is everyone feeling? There's a lot to process, isn't there? Emotions are all over the place. But what we do have to remember is this is the circle of life, and don't demonise the predator. I mean, we watch those blackbird chicks feed the worms. I mean, the blackbirds feed the worms to their chicks, and then we watch the fox feed the chicks to its cubs. And here there are plenty of foxes around with young cubs. And so there are hungry mouths to feed. Not only are they feeding on the chicks, they're feeding on insects in the grass. They're catching all sorts of other prey for them as well. Those cubs need their parents to be successful predators, and that's exactly what we've seen that fox just be. And there we go, it's got a squirrel. I don't think that cub hunted that itself.
No, I don't think so.
I don't think so.
Quite a hard
somehow.
catch for a fox.
But absolutely delightful to see those cubs doing so well. I'll tell you what though, Chris, I mean, this has been quite a tough programme, this, hasn't it? There's been...
Winners and losers.
Winners and losers.
Osprey's doing well.
But quite a lot of drama.
2 oyster-catcher chicks. Dartford's fledged.
OK, that's all the positive stuff. There has been a bit of predation too. So let's all take a deep breath. I think we deserve it now. And enjoy a bit of calm with a bit of blossom. That's good, I feel calmer now. I feel calmer, I've taken a deep breath, my heart rate's gone down, my pulse has gone down. I'm feeling good, I'm feeling good.
I was worried about you for a minute.
You should be, my emotions have gone all over the place. Let's have a look at some of our other live cameras because we've got some osprey. Let's go straight to the osprey, feeding its chicks. Oh, I love this nest. Look, happy nest, happy chicks, successful parents. Please don't let anything happen to those chicks before tomorrow because they are absolutely gorgeous.
Well, they're gorgeous but precious too, of course, aren't they? Three chicks there. What about our goshawks? What's happening at the goshawk nest? Oh, look at that, yes. Oh, it's the hardest bird in Britain. Avian terminator, 3 chicks. Fantastic, first time they've nest on Arn here, that young bird. And listen to the youngsters. Ravenous raptors.
We're going to be catching up with all of our birds of prey. Let's have a quick look at our kestrel, because we're going to be catching up with the kestrels tomorrow as well. Because again, this is a lovely nest. I mean, I know it didn't start very lovely last week when one of the siblings died and was then fed to the other siblings, but these are all doing really well and behaving themselves in the nest. So as I say, tomorrow we'll be catching up with our birds of prey and we'll also be seeing more of our Scottish foxes, the fox family that we've been following. Just look at those adorable cubs.
And I'll be exploring Studland, one of the most important sand dune habitats in the UK.
And we'll be back on Anglesey to meet the dedicated team rescuing these tropical species that are being stranded on the Menai Strait.
And remember, if you'd like to keep an eye on our cameras, you can. They're on 10 till 10. You can find those on our website, of course. Michaela, you're going to be with Hannah for Watch Out at 1 o'clock live tomorrow on Facebook and again visible on the website. We've got a new game.
OK.
It involves balloons, and I can give you a top piece of advice. Don't wear any trousers.
No trousers,
No
OK.
trousers. See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
What can we do to help nature and the environment? Well, sometimes big changes come from little actions. The Open University is exploring how simple and effective measures can make a big difference. To get inspired, visit bbc.co.uk/Springwatch and follow the links to the Open University.